Welcome back. Today in these Lord Files I would like to talk about some of my earliest original creations in the writing world. If you've watched the Fang video in the Lord Files, you would know the original story behind all those notebooks that I wrote starting when I was 10 going up, and how originally this character was going through all sorts of various fantasy IPs, from books, television shows, movies, video games. I would have him go to all these things because I wanted to take part in that type of creation, that type of adventure. I wanted to take part in it. So I created this character, Fang, to go initially to go to these other worlds to take part in those adventures. I started to create my own storylines in these worlds, and then I started to bring characters out from those worlds into these worlds. So, for example, let's say you would have a wizard from this IP, you would have a warrior from this IP, you would have a pirate from this IP, and all three of them would come together in a singular story, and they would join Fang at other worlds, and he would form friendships with all sorts of people, and all the roster would grow and grow and grow. But I was always going around IPs and settings and worlds that were already pre-established. The only thing original would be the storylines I was making and the character of Fang. Everything else was already pre-established. Sometime between ages 11 and 12, I started to create my very first original setting. It was called the Black Manor. Very original name, I know. The Black Manor was a mansion of sorts located in a three-sided cliffside box canyon. So the sun would not really necessarily have too much time to shine here. It was a very enclosed area. There's some dead trees. Some of them had some little leaves on them. It's located all around this manor, right? There's a little path leading up to it. But because with all these trees and the cliffside on all three sides, light wouldn't necessarily shine through because the sun rose the east, sets the west, right? So the sun would go all the way through. You would have a very short moment between here and here where any form of light would enter into this little canyon here. But since it was always at the back, it would shine forwards, keeping the manor in shadow almost at all times. Kind of looks like a vampire's manor if you thought about it. And then, now that I had the little locale thought up, the little where it would be situated, I started asking myself questions about what did it look like. I had to ask myself various forms of questions because I was the only one who could answer them. I created this manor, I had to know what it looked like. So I decided, I saw the movie Casper with Bill Pullman in the 90s. That mansion, Whipstaff Manor in Maine, it looked amazing. I loved the design, the little textures, the architecture, the inside of the place, all of it looked great. So I thought, I'm going to put Whipstaff Manor right there. But it's not going to be actually Whipstaff Manor. No, I called it the Black Manor because it was always in shadows, it was always dark. So the Black Manor looks like Whipstaff Manor. Okay, so what is the color of the walls outside? The color of the walls would be black. What about the shapes of the roofs? They would always be arched. They looks just like Whipstaff Manor if it were not run down. The interior was also pretty well kept. It's not dusty and old like actual Whipstaff Manor in the movie. No, it was actually pretty lived in. But, of course, Fang was rarely in this Black Manor, so I had to explain how the manor was always looking upkept, how fires were lit in the fireplaces, because you know how that common trope is. When you go into a video game, you're playing a video game, you go into all sorts of caves and dungeons, and there's fires lit, there's torches lit, but there's nobody who's ever supposed to have ever been there. They're starting to have answers for that. For example, in Skyrim, in the old Nord Barrows, the Draugr, the undead Nord corpses that are buried in these barrows, they are the ones who keep the place upkept. They're the ones who keep lighting the torches and exchanging all the sconces and all that stuff. They're the ones who keep it looking like that, upkept and all that stuff. So we're starting to have some answers like that. Well, my answer for why the Black Manor is always looking upkept is specifically magic. It's just magic. The one simplest excuse for how you can make something do something without being able to explain it properly. Magic it away, right? So we magicked it away. The Black Manor looked the way it does simply because magic. Let's see. This became the hub. The hub where Fang and all the other characters would go in here to just relax and think about their next move. They would discuss the previous arc, they would discuss where to go from there. They would, Fang would start becoming the leader and would dictate which characters would go to which types of worlds for each types of stories. The party would split, the party would reform here, new characters would show up here, old characters would die off. I was starting to craft a plot line, a large overarching plot line. It all began with this manor. And then I created a little ship, a little type of boat. It looked like an old 1600s frigate with all flags and whatever. I created this little ship. If you've played Kingdom Hearts, you know what a gummy ship is. A gummy ship is the type of Metroid little mini game. Not Metroid. Fuck, what's the word I'm looking for? Star Fox. That's it. I get those IPs mixed up. I don't play those games. Star Fox. It looked like a Star Fox segment where you're flying the gummy ship, shooting down all these things, making your way between one world to the next. Well, this little ship of Fangs was what the party would use to go from one IP world to the next. They would be traveling through the dimensional gateways. I was starting to come up with all sorts of in-universe reasons for how we go from place to place, and I started to answer more questions, more in-depth questions. Where was this Black Manor located? On what planets? So I started to create a planet on where the Black Manor was located. I was starting to create geography. What was the canyon out? What was the landscape outside of this canyon? What did it look like? Were there grass plains? Were there mountains behind you? I was starting to craft that. I was starting to craft civilizations. I was starting to craft villages. And for everything I made, I had to answer 100 questions to myself about what it looked like. And you can imagine that it gets very overwhelming very quickly. So I had to keep it small in a lot of places. I would only answer those hundreds of questions when we got there. So for the moment, I would say that on this planet there is three gaps. Fuck, that's not good. That's not a good... 2 lines. That's it, 2 lines. So let's say there's 3 little regions. West, middle, east. Let's say there's a large island here with a few dotted islands to the north with an overarching glacier. Let's say there's a smaller overarching glacier to the bottom, but nobody lives down there. This would be East Terra. This is where Terra's design started to get birthed, right? This wasn't exactly called Terra at the time, but I was starting to create the idea here. This Black Manor was located somewhere on this continent. This continent, at the time, was mostly desert, but in this little area, we had a little boxed canyon with some fertilization outside it, and some plains. There's a little lake over here. There's a bunch of mountains to the north of it, but for the most part, everything over here was all desert. So I created my first continent. What about civilizations? Well, there was a town over here, and there was a large metropolis in the desert here, near the water, the oceans. So there's a bunch of ports going through here. There's some little towns and suburbs out here, but nothing over here in this little corner, right? Nothing over here. But there's a village here. There might be a little port down here, all extending here, so they could go from there to there to there, and then you would have to travel a long way by foot to get to there, unless you were magic, of course, and you could teleport and all that stuff. So that's the first idea for a continent that I created. What did I call it? I didn't call the continent a name at all, and I apologize for the quality of picture. I know it's hard to see. Let me try to. Can you? Will it work? I don't think so. No. A little bit better, I think. Whatever. But I took this initial design for this little continent that I had the world map split into threes, and this was what I initially studied for Terra, right? This was the blueprint of blueprints. I only had this and a few islands. I had an overarching glacier to the north and a smaller one to the south. I would not be revisiting this area for a long time. After I created the Black Manor and this little continent, I scrapped that because I was all online now. I wasn't writing in the notebooks anymore. This is where I would call it the RP era, which I explained in further detail in the Fang lore files video. There, for the first few years, I would continue to use Fang as a character for all sorts of storylines and plot lines with my friends. But it wouldn't be until, say, 2012 that I would finally revisit this map. I would finally revisit this map in 2012. I wanted to keep this, but I got rid of the Black Manor. I got rid of the Black Manor and most of the geography here. So we would go back to having a 3-tiered area. I kept the glacier to the north. I would just call it the Frozen North. That's all I called it, just the Frozen North. And then the bottom here, that's just a glacier, an unnamed glacier. We just call it the Frozen South. Simple place names right now. We don't really have too many complexities yet. I wanted to bring this back, though. I wanted to bring that back. So I brought that little island back. This little big continent. It's kind of like the size of Australia for purposes. But I changed it up entirely. I jazzed it up. I decided I wanted this place to look very futuristic. This is going to be one of the most futuristic landscapes ever. It's practically the entire continent would be all sorts of sci-fi metropolis. It'd be one huge metropolis. This entire continent is a metropolis. There would be an island up here, and then a little bunch of islands up here. These would be two different nations. This would be the island nation that I would eventually call Aquarium. I'm just gonna call it DAQ for right now. This would be the island that's mostly a library. It's a very interesting place. I decided that I wanted to make a location kind of like rivaling like a library of Alexandria in ancient Greek days, but I wanted to go so much deeper into it. I wanted something that looked like a little port, a small little island city that was just a library. An island city that was a library containing the histories of the entire world. Sans for this continent. They don't have the history of this place. We'll explain that later. But this would contain the histories of these other two continents, and this little nation over here, and the history of the Frozen North. We would eventually create a little nation over here. It's very mountainous, but the glaciers have receded over here. I would eventually go to call this place Typist. Typist. This would be a little mountainous region where the glaciers have receded from, where a very hardy group would have roots here dating back to ancient times. These guys would be called the Dragoons, because in this little region, there were a species of dragon. They were not large, but in this region, there was native, a small type of wyvern class species that these hardy folk would be able to ride. They would tame these dragons and form partnerships with them, and they would be able to fly these dragons all across the world. And in the ancient world, this country, this nation, was able to conquer 2/3 of the known planet. I go into that a little bit in detail in the first book in Alepht's background. So if anybody had any questions about that, this is where that idea started. To the south of Tempest, I have a large continent. So we call this the Lagardian continent. This is technically called Western Terra. And then we have a tiny little canal island bridge, tiny little island bridge leading to another continent to the south. Climate, then I have to answer a bunch of questions to myself. What does this place look like? Well, LaGuardia looks pretty tundra-esque in this top corner right here. This entire bottom part is just one big desert, desolate wasteland. There's a big glass desert where it's so hot nothing can survive. There's a bunch of ruins dotting the sides. And then there's a small little cave right here. It's just a small little cave where some ancient stuff, some ancient treasures and all that stuff will be located, right? There's a bunch of mysteries surrounding this continent. People started to call it the Dark Continent, right? Nobody lives here except for dark creatures and monsters and fantasy NPC monsters that you would go to fight demons and all sorts of things, to level up your characters and all that stuff. RP days, this is building that world, right? So we have the tundras up here. Across the sea, there's Tempest, so we'd have a small little village here, a larger town here, and a tiny little port village here. And there's some islands off to the south there. This is recently conquered by the Lagardian Empire. I'll just call it the LAE. The Lagardian Empire, focused in the Heartlands here, which is mostly a temperate climate. If you've played the video game Oblivion, right, you know what Cyrodiil looks like, right? I'm just trying to give you an idea to picture in your head. The green landscapes of Cyrodiil. That's what I want you to picture when you look at LaGuardia's plains and landscapes. It's very green. There's a bunch of trees and temperate. It's very nice. It's a very nice place to live, this central area. The main hub is also the name of the empire, LaGuardia. This is a massive city that is very steampunkish. If you know what steampunk is, then you get to think airships. The Lagardian Empire was able to conquer this entire side, sans for Tempest up here. The Lagardian Empire was able to conquer this entire continent through the use of their airships. They would be able to fly their airships at quick speeds. They would bring their militias to every little village, every little port, every little town. They would build their own suburbs, so they would be able to get to all this. Each circle represents a little town. And then out down here in the south, here in southern LaGuardia, there is maybe one trading post here. You'd think, why is there a trading post down here? Technically, it's a little bit of a illegal trading post. We have scouts that go into the Dark Continent collecting glass and all sorts of other types of things that nobody's supposed to be able to find. And then people would travel from the mainland down south to this little trading outpost to purchase these items discreetly before heading back north. The climate down here is pretty arid. Let's say the Tog. Do you know, if you don't know what a Tog, jeez, how do I describe this? I'm not good with words right now. Gosh, there's a climate in California that is very rare. It's a very small type of climate that you don't see often. It's not quite a desert. It's not quite plains. It's something in the middle, right? Another example would probably be the types of plains you might find in northern in south in Central Africa, right? Those type of plains where you see all the zebras and the giraffes, that type of climate. That's pretty rare in America, right? Whatever. It looks like that, right? I don't know my own planet's map too well, do I? So that's what we have here. And then I haven't even gotten over here yet, but now we have two sides. Western Terra, the Lagardian continent. We only learned this by name in the book so far. It doesn't necessarily look like this in the books. This was just my prototype. Alright? This was the first prototype. This was the first prototype of new content, so that I created brand new ideas and all that. And then this was the second prototype. This is the third. I had these two sides created. Now we have the middle. The middle is landscapes dripping down from the mountains. From the north here, it's a little mountainous type of barrier between the glaciers up here and the plains to the south. Over here is where the Canesian kingdom is, in this little corner right here. So we're actually not too far south of the frozen north. And the entire area in the books is in this little region right here. This is the Shari subcontinent. Little Shari area region right here. So the size of this empire compared to LaGuardia, that's just laughable, right? That's how small this playable world is, and how much more there is to go. So then we have a large area here, and then we have a landscape going further over here, a land bridge here going south, and then closes off at a bunch of islands south, a bunch of islands, a bunch of them. Some of them are interconnected, some of them aren't. A bunch of islands here. And then we have the Tutelu over here in this little region right here. And then there's just a bunch of oceans here. There's a couple islands over here. And then there's one island over there. And this is Middle Terra. Let's say the bulk of all of the civilizations are to the eastern half. So there's a bunch of civilizations over here. Rate is located right here. There's a river going down here. The Canesian kingdom is right here. The main capital is right there. There's some sub cities over there. And then we have some mountains. Mountains going all the way up, and then mountains going all the way down here, separating the southern half. Separating left, right, and down. So we have 3 sections of Middle Terra. And we're only talking about one little section in these handful of books that I'm writing currently. So that just gives you an idea of just how much more there is. Let's say there's a couple other little areas over here. There's a big kingdom over here. So let's say this is Lur over here. Let's say there's the kingdom over here. And that's what that is, right there. So that's the big kingdom over here. This is pretty much plains and forests. Let's say a bunch of elves live in this region. This is very, very, very unsettled by humans. There's a bunch of humans over here. There's a bunch of elves over here. And in these mountains to the south, there's a bunch of mountains. A bunch of mountains. In this mountain region, this is where the dwarves live. Deep underground, we have a dwarven kingdom. And this is where one of the characters in the B team, that, CHAPARRAL, the immortal that we introduce in the second book, his little party contains a dwarf, and that dwarf hails from this kingdom here. So, there's not too much more left to go. And down here in the south, let's say we have an island kingdom here. Let's say these are the lunar islands. Let's call them the Moon Islands. Let's say a long time ago there was a break between the Eldari. there were two forms of the Eldari. The Sun Solari Eldari, that they were located primarily here. But a long time ago, there was a break. The Lunar Eldari broke away and settled in this region, moving up, eventually up through the forests and settling this entire little continent here. The Solari Eldari moved up through the Lacerdian continent, across the seas and into Tempest and into the frozen north. The Solari Eldari created many vast civilizations up here. Many. There's far more advanced than anything you find right now. But something happened. This entire little place immediately flash froze. It froze into a massive glacier. And everything got wiped away. Everything's gone. What happened? You're gonna have to find out in these books of mine. I'm giving you just the barest of tastes of what this world is supposed to look like. And the resolution from this webcam is absolutely dreadful, and you have no idea what you're looking at. But I can promise you, the 3 books that you've read all take place right here. Right here. Right here. It's all right there. Those 3 books, it's all right there. See the circle? That tiny little subcontinent. That tiny little peninsular area. That's the Shari Empire. That tiny little place. Look at how big this world is. Look at how much more you could see. Stay tuned. Be imaginative, my friends.